You will pay dearly for what you have done to my mate." The voice echoed through the market square like thunder, silencing the cruel laughter that still resonated in the air. The Lycan king stood there, imposing and terrifying, his amber eyes blazing with a fury that made the very air tremble. His long chestnut hair danced in the wind, his beard concealed a jaw clenched with contained rage, and his body radiated an ancestral power that brought the crowd to their knees. But he was not looking at them. His eyes were fixed on the figure kneeling in the mud, covered in rotten fish and filth. An Omega with golden hair, dressed in tattered beige servant's rags, trembled as tears carved clean paths through the dirt on her face. Serene. Her name was Serene, though the village called her Ghost Girl, cursed child. She had been only 5 years old when her parents died, leaving her alone in a world that despised Omegas without protection. 13 years of hunger, cold, and humiliation had followed. 13 years surviving on scraps, sleeping in a crumbling cottage, being treated as less than nothing. And that afternoon, they had decided that cruel words were not enough. Garrett, the blacksmith's son, and his pack had surrounded her. They threw rotten fish at her, one after another, laughing, celebrating her pain as if it were entertainment. But what they did not know, what no one could have imagined, was that this despised Omega was the destined mate of the most powerful and dangerous man in all the territories, and Aaron Wolvenheart had just arrived to claim what was his. Now, as he knelt before her, his calloused hands gently lifting her tear-stained face, the entire village held its breath. Because when a Lycan king finds his mate being tortured, there is no mercy, only justice and vengeance. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. In the forgotten corners of the world, where shadows grew long and hope withered like autumn leaves, there lived a child whose name would one day be whispered with reverence. But in those early years, Serene was nothing more than a ghost, a flicker of golden hair in the perpetual twilight of poverty. The cottage where she was born stood at the edge of the village, a crooked structure of rotting wood and crumbling stone that leaned into the wind like an old man bowing to fate. Her mother had been a seamstress with fingers that once danced across fabric like butterflies, creating beauty from scraps. Serene could still remember the way her mother would hum while she worked, old lullabies in a language no one else in the village spoke, melodies that seemed to come from some distant homeland her mother never named. She remembered the softness of her mother's lap, the way she would braid Serene's golden hair with patient fingers, weaving in wildflowers during summer months until Serene looked like a woodland sprite. Her father had been a woodcutter, his hands calloused and kind, smelling always of pine and earth. He had carried Serene on his shoulders through the forest, pointing out animal tracks and teaching her the names of trees. He had carved her toys from fallen branches, a little wooden horse she had treasured above all things, painting its mane with berry juice until it looked almost real. On winter evenings, he would tell her stories of brave Omegas who saved kingdoms, of love that conquered death, of magic that lived in the hearts of those pure enough to see it. They had loved each other with the fierce devotion of those who have nothing but each other. And when Serene arrived on a winter morning, pink and squalling, they had believed their love had finally taken form. Her mother had whispered that Serene's eyes were the color of hope, that her hair was spun from sunlight itself, that she would grow up to be someone extraordinary. Her father had promised to protect her always, to give her everything she needed to thrive in a world that was often cruel to Omegas without means. But the world is cruel to those who dare to hope. The winter that claimed Serene's 5th year also claimed her parents. A fever swept through the village like an invisible predator, and her mother was the first to fall. Serene remembered the heat radiating from her mother's skin, the way her once bright eyes had dulled to the color of ash. Her father had held his wife through 3 nights of delirium, whispering prayers to gods who seemed to have turned their faces away. When her mother's breath finally stilled, something in her father's chest broke with an audible crack that only Serene seemed to hear. He followed his wife into death within a week, as if his heart had simply decided it could not beat without her. The village elders found Serene curled between her parents' cold bodies, her small hands clutching her mother's lifeless fingers, her golden hair matted with tears. She had not cried out, had not screamed. She had simply held on, as if love alone could anchor the dead to the living world. There were no relatives to claim her, no kind souls to open their homes to an orphaned Omega child. In a world divided by designations, Omegas occupied the lowest rung, especially those without family or fortune. The village grudgingly allowed her to remain in the collapsing cottage, though they stripped it of anything valuable, anything her parents might have left behind. She survived on scraps, on the occasional crust of bread thrown to her like one might toss bones to a stray dog. Serene learned to make herself small, to move through the village like smoke, present but barely seen. She wore the same beige servant's dress day after day, a garment so worn that the fabric was thin as parchment, patched and repatched until it was more mending than original cloth. The hem dragged in the mud, and the sleeves hung past her fingertips. She grew into it slowly, painfully, her body reluctant to claim space in a world that had made clear she was unwanted. She found work where she could, cleaning chamber pots, scrubbing floors, hauling water from the well until her arms burned and her back screamed. The other villagers paid her in scraps, or not at all, their faces twisted with contempt whenever she approached. To them, she was less than nothing, an Omega without protection, without worth. They called her Ghost Girl, Cursed Child, the one who brought death wherever she wandered. The years passed like a slow drowning. Serene's childhood was measured not in laughter or play, but in hunger pangs and cold nights, in the ache of loneliness that became as familiar as her own heartbeat. She learned to find beauty in small things, the way morning light filtered through cracks in her cottage walls, the song of a single bird in spring, the taste of a stolen apple, sweet and forbidden on her tongue. She learned to read emotions in the faces of those who would not speak to her with kindness. She learned that silence could be both weapon and shield. She learned that survival was its own kind of courage, though it felt more like cowardice on the nights when she lay shivering on her thin pallet, wishing for the oblivion her parents had found. By the time she reached her 18th year, Serene had become a creature of quiet endurance, her golden hair the only brightness about her, a mockery of light in a life lived in shadow. Her eyes, once the blue of summer skies, had taken on the gray cast of someone who had seen too much sorrow too soon. She was beautiful in the way forgotten things are beautiful, lovely, and lost, and aching with unspoken stories. The village had grown comfortable with her presence in the way one grows comfortable with a persistent ache. She was simply there, the girl who cleaned their stables, the Omega who hauled their refuse, the creature who existed on the margins of their awareness. They did not see her as human, did not consider that beneath her silence lived a heart that still dared to hope, still dared to dream of something more. And then came the day that would cleave her life into before and after. The day the world would finally see Serene, though the seeing would come wrapped in cruelty. It was market day, and the village square thrummed with activity. Merchants hawked their wares beneath canvas awnings that snapped and billowed in the autumn wind. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasting meat, of spices and sweat, and the rich earth scent of harvested crops. Serene moved through the crowd like a whisper, her task simple, to purchase fish for the tavern keeper who had hired her for the day, paying her with the promise of a single meal. She approached the fishmonger's stall with her head bowed, her coins clutched in her palm. The fishmonger was a broad man with hands like hams, and a face perpetually reddened by drink and sun. He looked at her the way one might look at an insect, with casual disgust. "The cheap ones," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the market din. "3, please." He grunted, reaching beneath his table to pull out 3 fish that had clearly seen better days. Their eyes were clouded, their scales dull, and the smell that rose from them was the smell of decay, barely held at bay. Serene's nose wrinkled, but she said nothing. The cheap ones were all she could afford, and beggars, as she had learned, could not be choosers. As she reached for the fish, wrapping them carefully in the cloth she had brought, a voice rang out across the square, loud and mocking. "Look, brothers, the ghost girl thinks she deserves fresh fish." Serene's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It belonged to Garrett, the blacksmith's son, a beta male who led a pack of young men through the village like a small tyrant, seeking entertainment in cruelty. They had tormented her before, but always in passing, always with words rather than actions. She had learned to make herself invisible, to slip away before their attention could truly settle on her. But today, it seemed, the gods were not with her. Garrett strode toward her, his pack following like wolves scenting blood. There were 5 of them, all young, all strong, all bored with the mundane rhythms of village life and eager for sport. They formed a loose circle around her, and Serene felt her heart begin to hammer against her ribs. "I didn't," she whispered, clutching her fish to her chest. "I only asked for what I could afford." "What you could afford," Garrett repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. He turned to his friends, spreading his arms wide. "Did you hear that? The Omega thinks she's people, thinks she deserves to buy food in our market." Laughter rippled through the pack, cruel and sharp. Around them, other villagers began to notice the commotion. Some turned away, unwilling to involve themselves. Others drifted closer, drawn by the promise of entertainment, by the chance to see someone even lower than themselves be reminded of their place. "Please," Serene said, her voice trembling. "I have work to do. Let me pass." "Let her pass," he says. Another pack member, a tall man named Rowan, stepped closer. "But we're not done with our fun yet, Ghost Girl. You see, we've been talking, and we think you've gotten too comfortable here. Walking around like you belong, like you're not just a cursed Omega who should have died with her parents." The words hit her like physical blows. Serene flinched, tears already burning behind her eyes. She had built walls around her heart, thick and high, but they had never been strong enough to keep out words spoken with such venom. "My parents," she began, but her voice broke. "Your parents were weak," Garrett said, stepping so close she could smell the ale on his breath. "Just like you. Weak blood, tainted blood. You're a stain on this village, Ghost Girl, and I think it's time someone cleaned you up." He reached out and snatched the fish from her hands. Serene gasped, reaching for them instinctively, but Rowan grabbed her arms, holding her in place. The crowd around them had grown larger now, a ring of faces watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to eager anticipation. No one moved to help her. No one spoke in her defense. "What do you think, brothers?" Garrett held up the fish, examining them with exaggerated care. "These look rotten to me. Not fit for human consumption. Maybe they're perfect for an Omega, though. What do you say we give them back to her?" Understanding dawned too late. Serene tried to pull free, but Rowan's grip was iron. She watched, horror-struck, as Garrett drew back his arm and hurled the first fish directly at her face. It struck her cheek with a wet slap, the rotten flesh bursting on impact, spattering her face and hair with chunks of putrid meat and fish oil. The smell was overwhelming, a thick miasma of death and decay that made her gag. The crowd erupted in laughter, and Serene heard other voices joining in, encouraging the pack. The second fish hit her chest, sliding down the front of her already stained dress. The third struck her shoulder, and then others were joining in, villagers running to the fishmonger's stall, demanding the oldest, most rotten fish he had, purchasing them not for food, but for ammunition. They threw them like stones. Fish after fish pelted her body, her face, her hair. They struck her arms when she tried to shield herself, her legs when she attempted to crouch down. The laughter grew louder, more frenzied, feeding on itself until it seemed the entire village had become a single beast, unified in its cruelty. Serene could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stand there as they tried to bury her in rot and mockery. Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean paths through the filth, and still they threw, and still they laughed, and still no one helped. "Stinking Omega!" someone shouted. "Cursed child! Should have died with your parents." The words and the fish blended together into a nightmare symphony of humiliation. Serene's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in the mud, her hands covering her face, her body shaking with sobs that tore from her throat like shards of glass. She wished for death in that moment, wished for the earth to open and swallow her whole, wished for any escape from this endless torture. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The laughter died first, cut off as if by a knife. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with an emotion Serene could not identify through her tears. She heard the fishmonger's strangled gasp, heard the shuffle of feet as the crowd began to back away. She heard Garrett's voice, no longer mocking, but thin with something that sounded like fear. "My lord," he stammered. "We didn't know. We were just having a bit of fun with the Omega. We meant no harm." "No harm?" The voice that spoke was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of ancient forests and moonless nights. It rolled across the square like thunder, and Serene felt it reverberate in her bones. "You call this no harm?" She dared to lower her hands, to look up through the veil of her tears and the filth that covered her. And she saw him. He stood at the edge of the crowd, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. He was tall, impossibly tall, his frame broad and powerful beneath a cloak of midnight black that seemed to drink in the light around him. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of chestnut brown, wild and untamed, and his beard, equally long and brown, framed a face that was both beautiful and terrible in its intensity. But it was his eyes that held her. They were amber, the color of honey held up to firelight, the color of a wolf's eyes catching moonlight in a dark forest, and they were fixed on her with an expression she could not read, something between fury and recognition, and a longing so deep it made her breath catch in her throat. In that moment, something shifted in the very fabric of the world. Aaron had been walking through life as if through fog, never quite connecting, never quite feeling whole. He had ruled with strength and wisdom, but there had always been an emptiness inside him, a hollow space that echoed with loneliness. He had begun to believe that perhaps he was meant to walk alone, that the mate bond was nothing more than a fairy tale told to give hope to the hopeless. And then he had felt it. 3 days ago, while reviewing battle maps in his war room, a sensation like lightning striking his chest, a pull, insistent and undeniable, coming from the south. He had tried to ignore it, to focus on his duties, but it had grown stronger with each passing hour until he could think of nothing else. He had abandoned his responsibilities, gathered his most trusted men, and ridden toward that invisible beacon with a desperation he had never felt before. The closer he came, the more certain he became. His mate was calling to him, though she did not know it. His other half existed, lived, breathed somewhere in the world, and he would find her, or die trying. When he crested the hill overlooking the village and saw the crowd gathered in the square, he had felt the pull intensify to an almost painful degree. He had dismounted and walked toward the commotion, his heart pounding, his wolf rising to the surface, eager and anxious. And then he saw her, kneeling in the mud, covered in filth, surrounded by people who laughed at her suffering. And the bond had snapped into place with such force it nearly drove him to his knees. "Mine," his wolf had snarled. "Ours. Protect, claim, destroy those who hurt her." This was no ordinary man. This was a predator, a creature of myth and legend made flesh. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. pressing down on the gathered villagers until many fell to their knees, their heads bowed, their bodies trembling. "Lord Wolvenheart," the village elder wheezed, rushing forward and prostrating himself in the mud. "We did not expect you. We had no word of your coming." "Clearly," the man said, his voice cutting. His eyes never left Serene's face. "Or perhaps you would have hidden your depravity more carefully. Aaron Wolvenheart." The name rippled through the crowd in whispers, in gasps, in prayers. The Lycan king, ruler of the northern territories, the most powerful alpha in living memory. He was legend, spoken of in hushed tones, a figure of awe and terror, who had united the scattered packs under his rule through a combination of strength, cunning, and a ruthlessness that brooked no challenge. He was death-walking, a storm given form, and he was looking at Serene as if she were the only person in the world. Aaron moved forward, and the crowd scattered before him like leaves in a gale. He walked until he stood directly before her. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the silver threaded through his brown hair, the scars that crossed his knuckles, the way his jaw clenched as he took in the full extent of her humiliation. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice, when directed at her alone, was gentle in a way that made her chest ache. Serene tried to speak, but all that emerged was a broken sob. She was covered in filth, kneeling in mud, her dignity stripped away in front of the entire village. What could she possibly say? That her body was unharmed, but her spirit had been shattered? That she was used to cruelty, but this had somehow been worse than all that came before? She shook her head mutely, unable to meet his eyes, unable to bear the kindness she saw there when she had known nothing but contempt for so long. Aaron's hand rose, and she flinched instinctively. But his touch, when it came, was impossibly gentle. He cupped her chin with fingers that could crush stone, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to look at him. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a streak of fish oil mixed with tears. "Who did this?" he asked. And though his voice remained soft, there was something underneath it now, something dark and dangerous that made the air itself seem to shiver. "My lord," the elder began, his voice quavering. "It was merely a misunderstanding. The young men meant no real harm." "I did not ask you," Aaron said without looking away from Serene. "I asked her." Serene swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to remain silent, to protect herself by refusing to identify her tormentors. But those amber eyes held her captive, and she found herself unable to lie to him, unable to hide. "Garrett," she whispered. "And his friends, and others, many others." "Garrett," Aaron repeated, tasting the name like poison. He rose to his full height, turning to face the crowd. The blacksmith's son had tried to disappear into the mass of people, but there was nowhere to hide from the Lycan king's gaze. "Step forward." Garrett shook his head frantically, his face pale. "My lord, please. I didn't know she was important to you. I would never—" "You would never what? Torment someone weaker than yourself? Humiliate someone who could not fight back?" Aaron's voice dropped to a growl that was more animal than human. "You would never do these things if you thought there would be consequences? Is that what you mean to tell me?" Silence. Garrett's mouth worked soundlessly. "The problem," Aaron continued, "is not that you tormented someone under my protection. The problem is that you are the kind of creature who would torment anyone at all, who would find joy in suffering, who would turn cruelty into sport." He paused, and the weight of his regard seemed to press Garrett down until the young man fell to his knees. "Strip him." "My lord?" the elder squeaked. "You heard me. Strip him to the skin. Then bring me every rotten fish in this market, every piece of spoiled meat, every scrap of refuse. We're going to teach this village a lesson about what happens when the strong prey upon the weak." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some rushed to obey, terrified of disobeying the Lycan king. Others pleaded for mercy on Garrett's behalf. But Aaron ignored them all, turning back to Serene and extending his hand to her. "Come," he said gently. "Let me take you from this place." Serene stared at his hand as if it were a miracle, something impossible and too beautiful to be real. Her own hand, filthy and shaking, rose slowly to meet his. The moment their skin touched, she felt it, a jolt like lightning running from her palm up her arm and straight into her heart. The bond. The mate bond. She had heard of it in stories, in legends, but had never imagined it could be real, could be hers. From the expression that crossed Aaron's face, he felt it too. His eyes widened, his breath catching, and for a moment the powerful Lycan king looked young and vulnerable and utterly stunned. "Mate," he breathed, the word falling from his lips like a prayer. Behind them, Garrett's screams began as the villagers carried out their king's command, but Serene heard none of it. She was standing, lifted effortlessly by Aaron's strength, her hand still clasped in his, her entire world narrowing to the man before her, and the impossible truth singing through her veins. She had found her mate. Against all odds, against all reason, the cursed Omega had been claimed by the Lycan king. Aaron removed his cloak with swift efficiency, swirling it around Serene's shoulders. It dwarfed her, the heavy fabric pooling at her feet, but it was warm and clean and smelled of pine and snow, and something wild she could not name. He fastened it at her throat with gentle fingers, his eyes never leaving her face. "I need to address this village," he said softly, "but I will not leave you alone. Will you stand with me?" Serene nodded, not trusting her voice. She would have followed him anywhere in that moment, would have walked into fire if he asked it of her. Aaron turned to face the crowd, one arm coming around Serene's waist to hold her against his side. The gesture was possessive and protective, announcing to everyone watching exactly what she was to him. "This Omega," he said, his voice ringing out clear and commanding, "is my mate, my queen. And you have dared to assault her, to humiliate her, to treat her as less than the dirt beneath your feet." His eyes swept the crowd, and people flinched away from his gaze. "This village has a choice. You can accept her as your queen and make restitution for your crimes, or you can face the consequences of having harmed what is mine." The village elder threw himself forward, his forehead pressed to the mud. "We accept, my lord, we accept. Please have mercy on us. We did not know." "You did not know she was mine," Aaron agreed coldly. "But you knew she was helpless. You knew she was alone. And you chose cruelty. That is not a crime of ignorance. That is a crime of character." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But my mate is merciful where I am not. So I will give you this chance. Every family in this village will contribute to a fund for her. You will rebuild her home. You will provide her with everything she needs for a year, and you will beg her forgiveness." "My lord," Serene whispered, tugging at his arm. "You don't have to." "Yes," he said, looking down at her with eyes that burned. "I do. They hurt you. They hurt what is mine, and that cannot stand unpunished." His hand rose to cup her face again, and his voice softened. "But if you wish mercy for them, I will temper justice with your kindness." Serene looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had made her life a misery for as long as she could remember. She should have felt triumph, should have reveled in their fear. But all she felt was exhaustion and a distant, aching pity. "Let them rebuild the cottage," she said quietly. "Let them pay a small restitution if they choose, but no more than that. I don't want to be the reason for more suffering." Aaron studied her for a long moment, something like wonder crossing his features. Then he nodded, turning back to the crowd. "You heard your queen. Be grateful for her mercy. The next time I visit this village, I will expect to see her home restored and provisions waiting. Fail me, and I will not be so kind." He raised his voice. "And Garrett, you will wear those fish for 3 days. You will not wash. You will not hide. You will walk through this village and remember what it feels like to be helpless and humiliated. Perhaps it will teach you compassion. If it does not, you will answer to me personally." With that, Aaron swept Serene up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, her arms instinctively going around his neck, and he looked down at her with an expression that made her heart stutter. "Hold on," he murmured. And then he was moving, striding through the crowd with long, powerful steps, carrying her away from the village, away from the only home she had ever known, toward a future she could not begin to imagine. They reached the edge of the forest before he slowed, following a path only he could see through the dense trees. The autumn canopy closed over their heads, filtering the sunlight into shafts of gold and amber. The air smelled of moss and earth, and the rich decay of fallen leaves. Finally, when the village was far behind them, Aaron stopped in a small clearing beside a stream. He set Serene down carefully, keeping his hands on her waist until he was sure she was steady. "There's a stream here," he said. "Clean water. I'll turn my back while you wash. There are spare clothes in my pack." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner. Sorry I couldn't stop them before they hurt you." Serene looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared like an avenging angel, who had claimed her as his mate in front of the entire village. She should have been afraid. She should have been overwhelmed. But instead, she felt safe for the first time in 13 years. "You came," she said simply. "That's what matters." Something in Aaron's expression cracked, a wall crumbling to reveal raw emotion beneath. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. "I've been searching for you my whole life," he whispered into her hair. "I felt you across the distance, felt something calling me here. I didn't understand until I saw you, until I touched you. You're mine, Serene, mine to protect, mine to cherish, and I swear on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, that no one will ever hurt you again." Serene buried her face in his chest, and finally let herself break. She sobbed into the fabric of his shirt, great heaving cries that shook her entire body, releasing years of grief and loneliness and pain. And Aaron held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, his voice a low rumble of comfort and promises. When her tears finally subsided, he kissed her forehead with infinite gentleness and guided her toward the stream. True to his word, he turned his back, standing guard while she stripped off her ruined dress and waded into the cold water. The stream was shallow but swift, and the coldness of it made her gasp. She scrubbed at her skin with handfuls of smooth river stones, washing away the filth, the smell, the memory of hands throwing rotten fish. She washed her hair 3 times, combing through the tangles with her fingers until the water ran clear. When she emerged, shivering, she found soft clothes laid out on a rock beside the stream. A shirt of dark gray linen, too large for her, but clean and whole. Pants that she had to roll at the waist and ankles. Thick socks. Even a cloak, smaller than Aaron's but lined with fur. She dressed quickly, then cleared her throat. Aaron turned, and the expression on his face when he saw her made her blush. He looked at her as if she were a queen indeed, as if she were beautiful beyond measure. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They continued through the forest, Aaron leading the way with confident strides while Serene followed, her mind whirling with questions she didn't know how to ask. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they emerged into another clearing where a camp had been set up. Several men stood guard, each of them radiating the same predatory power as Aaron, though to a lesser degree. They bowed when they saw their king, their eyes curious as they took in Serene. "My mate," Aaron announced simply, and the men's eyes widened in shock before they bowed again, this time deeper, this time to her. "My queen," they murmured in unison. That night, as Serene sat beside a fire that chased away the autumn chill, wrapped in borrowed furs and eating her first real meal in days, she watched Aaron across the flames. He was in conference with his men, discussing routes and plans in low voices, but his eyes kept finding her, checking to make sure she was still there, still safe, still real. When his men finally dispersed to their own bedrolls, Aaron came to sit beside her. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Tell me about yourself," he said quietly. "I want to know everything." So Serene told him. Haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, she shared her story. Her parents' death, her years of poverty and loneliness, the small joys she had clung to, the books she had taught herself to read by candlelight, the flowers she had pressed between pages to preserve their beauty. She told him about the cottage that had been her prison and her refuge, about the village that had never felt like home, and Aaron listened with absolute attention, his eyes never leaving her face. When she spoke of her parents, he took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When she described her loneliness, his jaw tightened with barely suppressed rage. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You survived," he said finally. "Against everything, you survived. That takes a kind of strength most people never understand, a kind of courage that has nothing to do with fighting or conquering." He shifted closer, his shoulder pressing against hers. "You're not weak, Serene. You're not cursed. You're extraordinary." "I don't feel extraordinary," she admitted. "I feel small and scared, and like I might wake up at any moment to find this was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Aaron promised. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'm real. This is real, and I'm not going anywhere." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why me? You're a king. You could have anyone. Why would fate choose a poor Omega with nothing to offer?" Aaron's smile was sad and knowing. "Because fate doesn't choose based on wealth or status. It chooses based on something deeper. On souls that recognize each other. On hearts that fit together like puzzle pieces." He reached up, tucking a strand of her golden hair behind her ear. "I've been king for 15 years, Serene. I've had every Omega in the kingdom presented to me as a potential mate, but I never felt anything for any of them. No pull, no recognition, just emptiness." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And then I felt you. 3 days ago, like a beacon calling me home. I've been traveling day and night to find you. And the moment I saw you, covered in filth and tears, brought to your knees by people who should have protected you, I knew. You're the reason my heart has been waiting. You're the reason I'm alive." Tears slipped down Serene's cheeks again, but these were different. These were tears of wonder and relief, and a fragile, tentative joy. "I've never had anything of my own," she whispered. "Never had anyone who chose me." "You have me now," Aaron said fiercely, "and I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are chosen. You are wanted. You are loved." The word hung between them, bright and terrifying and perfect. Love. It was too soon, surely. They had known each other for mere hours. But the mate bond sang in Serene's veins, and when she looked into Aaron's eyes, she saw forever reflected back at her. "I don't know how to be a queen," she said, her voice small. "Then I'll teach you," Aaron replied. and you can teach me how to be worthy of you." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Serene found herself leaning forward as well, drawn by a force stronger than gravity. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Aaron rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the space between. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Come to my home. Let me show you what it means to be cherished." "Yes," Serene breathed. Because what else could she say? This man had saved her, had claimed her, had offered her everything she had ever dreamed of and more. "Yes, I'll stay." That night, she slept in Aaron's arms, wrapped in his cloak and his warmth, listening to the steady drum of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For the first time in 13 years, she slept without fear, without cold, without loneliness. She slept like someone who had finally come home. The journey to Aaron's territory took 3 days. They traveled through forests so ancient, the trees seemed to whisper secrets, across meadows painted with late autumn wildflowers, alongside rivers that sang songs older than memory. Aaron's men rode ahead and behind, but the king kept Serene with him, seated before him on his massive black stallion, his arms forming a protective cage around her. Each night, they would make camp under the stars, and Aaron would ensure Serene had the warmest furs, the best portions of food, the softest place to rest. He would sit beside her as she ate, watching her with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but instead felt like safety. Sometimes his hand would reach out, seemingly of its own accord, to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear, to brush his fingers across her cheek, to trace the line of her jaw with such reverence it made her shiver. The mate bond between them grew stronger with each passing hour. Serene found herself hyper-aware of his presence, of the way his scent of pine and snow and wild things wrapped around her like a blanket. She noticed details she had missed before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the surprisingly gentle curve of his mouth beneath his beard. She found herself wanting to touch him, to trace those scars with her fingers, to know the story behind each one. He told her stories as they rode, filling the silence with tales of his childhood, of the responsibilities that had been thrust upon him too young when his father fell in battle. He spoke of growing up as the runt of his litter, smaller and weaker than his brothers, forced to fight for every scrap of respect. He described how he had trained relentlessly, pushing his body beyond its limits, until he had grown into the powerful alpha he was now. He told her of the pack wars, of the violence and bloodshed, of the day he had stood over his father's and brothers' bodies and sworn to bring peace to their lands no matter the cost. He spoke of the loneliness of leadership, of making decisions that cost lives, of the weight of a crown that grew heavier with each passing year. He described his home with such love that Serene could picture it before she ever saw it. A fortress of stone and wood nestled in the mountains, surrounded by forests teeming with life. He spoke of the gardens his mother had planted, still tended by faithful servants though she had been gone for 2 decades. He described the great hall where he held court, the library filled with books collected over generations, the training grounds where his warriors honed their skills. And slowly, carefully, Serene began to share her own stories in return. Not just the pain, but the beauty she had found in spite of it. She told him about teaching herself to read by candlelight, using a tattered book of poems her mother had owned. She described the secret place she had found in the forest, a small clearing where wildflowers grew in abundance and deer would come to drink from a crystal-clear spring. She spoke of the stars she would count on sleepless nights, making wishes on each one, even though she had long ago stopped believing wishes could come true. The way snowflakes caught on her eyelashes in winter, the taste of wild strawberries stolen from the forest's edge, the comfort of her mother's lullaby, which she still hummed to herself on difficult nights. Aaron drank in every word, every detail, as if she were telling him the secrets of the universe. And perhaps, in a way, she was. because every story she shared was a piece of her soul, offered up to this stranger who felt more familiar than her own reflection. On the third evening, they crested a ridge, and Serene gasped. Before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset, stood Aaron's home. Wolf Watch, he called it. The fortress rose from the mountainside like a natural extension of the stone, its walls thick and imposing, its towers reaching toward the sky. But for all its strength, it was beautiful too, with carved wooden shutters and gardens cascading down terraced levels and smoke rising from 100 chimneys, promising warmth within. "Welcome home," Aaron murmured against her ear, and the words sent a shiver down her spine. Home. Could this place really become her home? Could she truly belong here? They rode through gates that opened at their approach, past guards who bowed deeply, into a courtyard bustling with activity. People stopped what they were doing to stare as Aaron dismounted and lifted Serene down. She could feel their curiosity, their shock, their speculation. Who was this girl in oversized clothes, with tangled golden hair and uncertain eyes? Aaron seemed to sense her discomfort. He took her hand firmly, his grip reassuring, and led her through the crowds and into the fortress proper. Inside, the stone walls were softened with tapestries and furs, with torches that cast dancing shadows and filled the air with the scent of burning pine. Servants scurried out of their path, their eyes wide. He brought her to a suite of rooms that stole her breath. There was a bedroom with a bed large enough for 5 people, piled high with furs and cushions, a sitting room with chairs positioned before a fireplace, a bathing chamber with a tub carved from stone and already filled with steaming water. Windows overlooked the forest, and in the distance, she could see mountains painted purple by the setting sun. "This is the Queen's chamber," Aaron said quietly. "It has been empty for 20 years since my mother passed. I've had it cleaned and prepared for you. If there's anything you need, anything you want changed, you have only to ask." Serene turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Aaron moved to stand behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he countered. "These are just rooms. You're what makes them matter." She turned to face him, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Aaron." "I know it's fast," he interrupted gently. "I know you need time to adjust, to feel safe here. I'm not expecting anything from you, Serene. The mate bond is powerful, but I want you to choose me too. Not just because fate says we belong together, but because you want to." His hand slid down her arms, his touch feather-light. "Take all the time you need. I'll be patient. I'll be whatever you need me to be." The tenderness in his voice, the understanding, the sheer decency of giving her a choice when he could have simply demanded, made Serene's heart clench. She thought of the village, of people who had never seen her as anything more than a burden. And here was a king, the most powerful man she had ever met, treating her like she was made of spun glass and starlight. "Thank you," she managed, "for understanding, for all of this." He smiled, and it transformed his face from fierce to something approaching boyish. "Rest tonight. Bathe. There are clean clothes in the wardrobe. Tomorrow I'll introduce you to the pack, to the people who will be your subjects." He hesitated, then added, "If you need me, I'm in the king's chamber, just through that door. Don't hesitate to call out." He left her then, though she could sense his reluctance in every step. The door closed softly behind him, and Serene was alone. She moved to the tub, shedding her borrowed clothes, and sinking into water so hot it almost hurt. But it was a good hurt, a cleansing hurt. She soaked until her fingers pruned, washing away the last traces of her old life. When she finally climbed out and dried herself with the softest towel she had ever touched, she found nightclothes laid out on the bed, a sleeping gown of pale blue silk that whispered against her skin like water. She put it on and climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into softness that seemed to embrace her. But sleep would not come. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the fortress settling around her, and felt utterly adrift. This room, for all its beauty, was not home. Not yet. It was too large, too empty, too quiet. Before she could second-guess herself, Serene slipped from the bed and padded barefoot to the door Aaron had indicated. She hesitated with her hand on the handle, then pushed it open. Beyond was Aaron's chamber, similar to hers but darker, more masculine. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was the king himself. He had shed his travel clothes and wore only a pair of loose pants. In the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see the network of scars that crossed his back, testament to battles fought and won. Serene? He turned, surprise and concern flickering across his face. Is something wrong? She shook her head, suddenly shy. I couldn't sleep. It's too quiet, too empty. She swallowed hard. Could I stay here? With you? I'm not asking for... Yes, he said simply, crossing the room in 3 long strides. Yes, you can stay. Always. He took her hand and led her to his bed, pulling back the furs and helping her climb in. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he slid in beside her, keeping a careful distance between them. But Serene, emboldened by the darkness and the mate bond singing in her blood, moved closer. She pressed herself against his side, resting her head on his chest, listening to the thundering of his heart. Aaron's arm came around her immediately, holding her close, and she felt him release a shuddering breath. This is what I wanted, she whispered, to be close to you, to not be alone. You'll never be alone again, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. I swear it. They lay like that for a long while, neither sleeping, just existing in the warmth and comfort of each other's presence. Finally, Aaron spoke again. Tell me what you're thinking. Serene was quiet for a moment, gathering her courage. I'm thinking that a week ago, I was nobody. I had nothing. I expected nothing. And now I'm here, in a castle, in a king's bed, wearing silk and told I'm a queen. It doesn't feel real. I keep waiting to wake up, to find myself back in that falling down cottage, cold and hungry and alone. What can I do to make it feel real? Aaron asked, his hand stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. Just this, Serene said. Hold me. Talk to me. Let me know you're real and I'm not dreaming. So Aaron talked. He told her about his childhood, about being the youngest in a litter of 3 and having to fight for everything. He told her about losing his father and brothers in the same battle, about being thrust into kingship at 16 with no preparation and enemies circling like vultures. He told her about the loneliness of leadership, of being surrounded by people but truly known by none. Until you, he said softly. The moment I touched you, I felt seen for the first time in my life. Not as a king, not as an alpha, just as me, as Aaron. I see you, Serene promised. And you see me, the real me, not the ghost girl the village tried to make me. The real you is magnificent, Aaron murmured, strong and kind and brave beyond measure. They talked until exhaustion finally claimed them both, their words trailing off into comfortable silence, their breathing sinking, their hearts beating in time. And when Serene finally slept, it was the sleep of the truly safe, the truly home. The days that followed passed in a blur of new experiences and overwhelming emotions. Aaron introduced her to his pack, to the alphas and betas who served him, to the omegas who would now look to her as their queen. Some welcomed her with genuine warmth. Others were more reserved, uncertain of this stranger who had appeared from nowhere to claim the highest position in their society. But Aaron never left her side during those early days. He was her shield and her advocate, making it clear through word and deed that anyone who disrespected his mate would answer to him personally. And slowly, tentatively, Serene began to find her place. She discovered that being queen meant more than wearing a crown. It meant listening to disputes and offering wisdom. It meant visiting the sick and the elderly. It meant being a symbol of hope and stability for people who had known too much war and loss. And surprisingly, she found she was good at it. Her years of hardship had given her empathy, an understanding of suffering that made her approachable, where Aaron's strength made him fearsome. People began to seek her out, to share their troubles, to ask for her intercession with the king. Aaron watched her grow into her role with undisguised pride. But more than that, he courted her with a patience and devotion that left her breathless. He brought her wildflowers picked from the mountainside. He taught her to ride, his hands steadying her when she wobbled, his laughter warm when she finally mastered the reins. He read to her in the evenings, his voice turning poetry into magic. And slowly, carefully, the distance between them closed. A hand held while walking became arms around her waist. Chaste kisses on the forehead became deeper kisses that left them both trembling. Separate beds became a shared bed, became nights where they lay tangled together, learning the geography of each other's bodies with wonder and reverence. 6 months after Serene arrived at Wolf Watch, Aaron proposed in the garden beneath a sky full of stars. He had no ring, only his heart laid bare, his words simple and true. Marry me, not because fate demands it, but because I cannot imagine my life without you, because you are the light that chased away my darkness, because I love you with everything I am. Serene had cried, had said yes through her tears, had kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy that lived inside her. They married a month later, a ceremony that brought together packs from across the territories that celebrated not just their union, but the peace and prosperity it represented. The wedding took place in the Great Hall of Wolf Watch, decorated with thousands of white flowers that Serene had chosen herself. She wore a gown of silver silk that caught the light with every movement, making her look like moonlight given form. Her golden hair had been woven with pearls and crystals, cascading down her back in elaborate braids. When Aaron saw her walking toward him down the aisle, his eyes had filled with tears, his composure cracking to reveal the depth of his emotion. The ceremony was conducted by the eldest alpha of the territories, a man whose voice carried the weight of centuries. He spoke of the sacred nature of the mate bond, of two souls recognizing each other across the vastness of existence, of love that transcended logic and reason. He bound their hands with silver cord, symbolizing the unbreakable connection between them. When Aaron spoke his vows, his voice was rough with feeling. I, Aaron Wolvenheart, take you, Serene, as my mate, my queen, my everything. I promise to protect you with my life, to cherish you with my heart, to honor you with my actions. I promise to be worthy of the gift you are. From this day until my last breath, you are mine, and I am yours. Serene's vows were equally heartfelt, spoken through tears of joy. I, Serene, take you, Aaron Wolvenheart, as my mate, my king, my home. I promise to stand beside you in times of peace and war, to love you in darkness and light, to be the shelter you can always return to. You saved me, not just from cruelty, but from a life without love, and I will spend forever showing you what that means to me. The hall erupted in cheers when they kissed, a kiss that spoke of promises and passion, and a future built on the foundation of their love. The wedding night was a revelation. Aaron loved her with a gentleness that belied his strength, with a patience that made her feel worshipped. He carried her to their chamber, laying her down on a bed scattered with rose petals, his eyes dark with desire, and something deeper, something eternal. He took his time learning what made her gasp, what made her sigh, what made her cry out his name like a prayer. His hands mapped every curve of her body. His lips followed the path his fingers traced, and he murmured words of love and devotion against her skin until she trembled with need. And when they finally joined together, when he made her truly and completely his, Serene felt the mate bond settle into place with a rightness that resonated through her very soul. It was more than physical, more than pleasure, though both were present in abundance. It was a completion, a coming home, a recognition that they were two halves of the same whole finally reunited. Mine, Aaron breathed against her lips. Always mine. Yours, Serene agreed, her voice breaking on the word. Always yours. The year that followed was the happiest of Serene's life. She grew into her role as queen, her confidence blooming alongside her love for Aaron. She established schools for Omega children, ensuring that no child would grow up illiterate and hopeless as she had. She created shelters for those without homes, remembering too well the cold and hunger of her youth. And Aaron supported her in everything, his love for her evident in every glance, every touch, every public declaration of her worth. The pack, seeing their devotion to each other, embraced her fully. She was no longer the outsider, the poor Omega who had somehow seduced their king. She was their queen, beloved and respected in her own right. But it was the discovery that she was pregnant that truly transformed everything. Serene had suspected for weeks, noting the changes in her body, the way her senses had sharpened, the overwhelming fatigue that struck without warning. When the healer confirmed it, she had wept with joy, scarcely able to believe that after a lifetime of loss, she was being given this gift. She told Aaron that night, in their bed, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, watching his face carefully. For a moment, he was utterly still. Then a smile spread across his features, so bright and joyful it made him look young again. "A pup," he breathed. "We're having a pup." He kissed her with fierce tenderness, his hand covering hers over her stomach, and Serene felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and as her belly grew, she found herself exhausted and uncomfortable. But Aaron was devoted, catering to her every need, refusing to leave her side any longer than necessary. He talked to their unborn child every night, his hands spanning her swollen stomach, his voice soft with wonder. "You're going to be so loved," he promised. "Your mother is the strongest, kindest woman I've ever known, and I will teach you to be strong too. To be kind. To be worthy of the gift we've been given." Serene would run her fingers through his hair, tears slipping down her cheeks, because she had never imagined she could have this. A mate who loved her, a child growing inside her, a home and a purpose and a future bright with promise. The labor, when it came, was long and brutal. Serene screamed through contractions that felt like they were tearing her apart, gripping Aaron's hand so tightly she left bruises. But he never left, never flinched, his voice steady as he coached her through each wave of pain. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You're strong. You're brave. Just a little longer, my love." And finally, after hours that felt like days, she heard it. The sharp, indignant wail of a newborn, and the healer was placing a tiny, squirming bundle in her arms. "A son," the healer announced, smiling. "A healthy baby boy." Serene looked down at the infant in her arms, at his screwed-up face and tiny fists, at the shock of dark hair already visible on his head. He was perfect. He was hers. He was everything. "Magnus," she whispered, the name they had chosen together. "His name is Magnus." Aaron leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, his hand incredibly gentle as it stroked their son's cheek. "Hello, Magnus," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, little one." Magnus, as if recognizing his father's voice, quieted, his tiny hand reaching out to wrap around Aaron's finger. And in that moment, Serene felt her heart expand to a size she hadn't known was possible. This was her family. This was her home. This was everything she had survived for, everything she had endured, and it was worth it. Every cold night, every cruel word, every moment of loneliness had been worth it to arrive here, to this perfect moment of love and peace and belonging. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless joy. Magnus grew from a tiny, fragile thing into a robust pup with brown fur, inherited from his father. He had Aaron's amber eyes and Serene's gentle nature, a combination that made him utterly irresistible. His first shift came at 3 months old, earlier than expected, a sign of the powerful bloodline running through his veins. Serene had been nursing him when she felt the change ripple through his small body. In seconds, the baby in her arms had become a tiny brown wolf pup, no larger than a rabbit, with oversized paws and ears too big for his head. He had looked up at her with those amber eyes, whimpering in confusion, and Serene had laughed through her tears of wonder. Aaron had burst into the room, having felt the shift through their bond, and had stared at their son in awe. "He's perfect," he had whispered, reaching out to stroke the soft puppy fur. "Absolutely perfect." Magnus learned to shift between forms with remarkable ease, though he seemed to prefer his wolf form, spending hours exploring the fortress on unsteady puppy legs, getting into everything, knocking over vases and tangling himself in curtains. The servants adored him, sneaking him treats when they thought no one was looking, laughing at his antics, even when he created chaos. Aaron was a devoted father, spending hours playing with his son, teaching him to track scents, to listen to the wind, to understand the forest. He would shift into his own wolf form, massive and powerful, his fur a darker brown than Magnus's, and the two would wrestle in the gardens, Aaron always careful to let Magnus win, to build his confidence. He taught him the names of plants and animals, the signs of changing weather, the paths through the mountains that their ancestors had walked for generations. Serene would watch them from the terrace, her hand resting on her belly where another pup was already growing, though she had not yet told Aaron. She would see her mate and son tumbling in the grass, hear their playful growls and yips, and feel her heart swell with a love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was everything she had ever wanted, and so much more than she had ever dared dream. At night, Magnus would fall asleep between his parents. His small wolf form curled against Serene's chest, his breathing soft and even. Aaron would wrap them both in his arms, his larger body forming a protective circle around his family, and Serene would drift off to sleep, feeling safer and more loved than she had ever thought possible. And Serene watched them together, her heart so full it ached, scarcely able to believe this was her life. On a spring afternoon, when Magnus was 6 months old, the three of them sat in the garden. Magnus was in his wolf form, a fluffy brown pup chasing butterflies with single-minded determination, yipping with frustration when they eluded him. His tail wagged furiously as he pounced on shadows, his ears perked forward, his entire being focused on the impossible task of catching something that floated just out of reach. Serene leaned against Aaron's shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching their son play. The garden was in full bloom, roses and jasmine perfuming the air, bees humming lazily among the flowers. The sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the pine forests beyond the fortress walls. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you found me?" "Every day," Aaron admitted. "I think about how close I came to never finding you. If I had arrived an hour later, if I had traveled a different road, if I hadn't felt that pull." He shuddered. "I think about it and I'm grateful. So grateful." "I'm grateful too," Serene said, "for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they led me here. To you. to Magnus. To this life I never dreamed I could have. She paused, then added softly, "Sometimes I still have nightmares about that day. About the fish, the laughter, the feeling of being so completely alone. But then I wake up, and you're beside me, and Magnus is sleeping in his cradle, and I remember that the nightmare is over, that I survived, that I won." Aaron turned, cupping her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "You deserve every happiness, Serene. You deserve the world, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you. You already have," she whispered. "You gave me everything when you gave me your heart." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, over the place where new life grew. "And now you're giving me more." It took him a moment to understand. Then his eyes widened, his breath catching. "Another pup?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. "Another pup. Due in the winter." Aaron let out a whoop of joy that startled Magnus, who came bounding over to see what the excitement was about. Aaron scooped his son up, tossing him gently into the air, while Magnus yipped with delight, then pulled both his mate and his son into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," he whispered against Serene's hair. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me a family when I thought I would walk alone forever." "Thank you for finding me," Serene replied. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself." They kissed, soft and sweet, while Magnus tumbled in the grass and the sun warmed their faces and the world seemed to hold its breath in acknowledgement of this perfect moment. In the distance, Serene could see the mountains that surrounded Wolfwatch, their peaks still capped with snow even in spring. She could hear the sounds of the fortress coming to life, servants going about their duties, warriors training in the yard, children playing in the streets beyond the walls. She could smell dinner being prepared in the kitchens, bread baking and meat roasting. This was her kingdom now. These were her people, and she would rule beside Aaron with the same strength and compassion that had allowed her to survive her darkest days. Serene had been the ghost girl, the cursed Omega, the one who brought death wherever she walked. But she had also been strong. She had survived. She had endured. And in the end, she had found not just love, but herself. She was no longer Serene the orphan, alone and afraid. She was Serene Wolvenheart, queen of the Lycans, mate to Aaron, mother to Magnus and the pup growing inside her. She was beloved. She was home. She was whole. And as Magnus bounded over to them, his tail wagging furiously, demanding attention with happy barks, Serene laughed, the sound bright and free, and full of all the joy she had never dared hope for. Aaron shifted into his wolf form, his massive body dwarfing their son's, and the two began to play fight, rolling in the grass with growls that were more affectionate than threatening. Serene watched them, her hand resting on her belly, thinking of all the springs to come, of watching Magnus grow into a strong, kind alpha like his father, of welcoming new pups into their family, of growing old with Aaron, their love deepening with each passing year, of finally being able to rest, to breathe, to simply exist without fear. The ghost girl had found her voice. The cursed child had found her blessing. The Omega without worth had discovered she was priceless. This was her story. Not a tragedy, but a triumph. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a tale of suffering, but a testament to the transformative power of love, the strength found in vulnerability, and the beauty that can bloom even in the darkest soil. And it was beautiful. So beautiful it made her cry. So beautiful it made her believe in magic again. So beautiful it made every moment of pain worth it. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was forever. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.